Hello and welcome. Thanks for joining us for this week's panel conversation. I'm really excited about today's panel. They are a couple of them are friends and colleagues, and I've got a third person who I'm just meeting today, but I'm excited about her perspectives around local engagement. My name is Matt Fulton. I'm the Vice President for National Engagement for a company called POCO. We generally work with communities around engagement and with helping them assess performance from a resident's perspective. And we've established these or initiated these conversations really with the intent of just sharing what's working in communities, how they are connecting with their residents, what they're finding successful in connecting with those harder to reach populations that we all have in our communities, and in a way to just kind of help us get through these really challenging times. Of course, with the pandemic, we're now kind of entering into this period of time where there are federal dollars that communities are going to be spending to help with the recovery. And we're exploring a little bit about what communities are doing in preparation for the use of those funds. Here is a schedule for how the meeting is going to progress. I'll do a quick introduction of our panelists. And then after queuing up the topic a little bit, we will jump into the questions. The whole session will last generally about an hour, and just really thankful that you're willing to take a little time and listen to this recording. So let's just kick into meeting our panelists. Our first panelist is Shawn Gillen. I've known Shawn for many, many years. He was actually the city administrator in a community that I grew up in. And so I was really happy to reconnect with him on these panels. Shawn is currently the city manager for Tybee Island, Georgia. Tybee Island is a barrier island just outside of Savannah. But I gotta say, Shawn has kind of had this interesting career path because he started as a mayor in Illinois. And then after his term of mayor, he actually helped the city transition to a full-time city administrator. And then he became a city administrator for Lexington Fayette Urban County Government in Kentucky. As he became more and more interested in government, he decided to pursue it as a career. And so he went out and got his master's degree at the University of Kentucky, and continued on to get his PhD. So he's actually Dr. Gillen. He completed both degrees in just 4 short years. He was a professor for a short period of time at Eastern Kentucky, and then became the city administrator in Grand Rapids, Minnesota, in northern Minnesota. And after the northern Minnesota cold drove him away, he went down to Georgia and became Doraville's first city manager as they transitioned from a strong form of government. And then he is now in Tybee Island. Hey, Shawn, thank you so much for being part of this conversation, and would love to hear a little bit more about your background.
Oh, well, thank you very much. And I'm very excited that there's someone from Iowa on the panel today. That's where I did my undergrad. It's very, I got my heart is sometimes, a lot of my heart is still in Iowa, and it's fun to see someone from there. So glad to be here. Thanks for asking me. This is great. You made that joke about northern Minnesota winters are rough. They're brutal. But I always tell people it's not the cold, it's the duration of that winter. And after 6 years up there, my wife and I decided to look to the southeast, and had the great opportunity to go to Doraville, Georgia, which is just outside of Atlanta. It's on the beltway there around 285 around Atlanta. We weren't planning on moving ever again, and having teenage daughters, that was a false promise, because we said, unless Tybee Island offers me a job, we will not move. Here I am. So I moved a 15-year-old or 16-year-old during her junior year in high school to go to another county in Georgia. But it's been a thrill. I went from a 1-hour commute by car to a 3-minute walking commute to my office, and the beach is 700 steps from my house. So it's been a wonderful opportunity, but I'm just thrilled to be here. And Matt, thanks. It's great to see your face again, and I really appreciate you reaching out.
Matt, you're muted.
Thank you. Shawn, I just wanted to say that as I go back up to Grand Rapids, it's just so nice because I know a lot of their success is really based upon your time up there. So really appreciate you spending time in my hometown.
Yeah, it was Grand Rapids is a gem of a community right there on between the Iron Range and the timber industry up there, and with the paper mill. But the community itself has been very fortunate. Our girls got into ballet because of the Performing Arts Center that's there, funded by the Blandon Foundation. And it's really a wonderful place to raise a family. And, but there's, like I said, the winters are long. Northern Minnesotans are hardy people, but I still have friends back there. They're great people. And my wife and I kicked around the idea of getting back up there to pay a visit, just to see how things have changed and visit some folks from there, because it is such a special place. And the birthplace of Judy Garland. So
that's right. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Shawn. Let me introduce Jennifer Swezey, who was recently hired as the assistant city manager in Muskogee, Oklahoma. She comes to that community with 17 years of experience, the last 10 of which were in local government, most recently as a communications and media relations manager for Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. In her current role, she's overseeing just a ton of responsibilities, including the airport, the civic center, the animal shelter, city departments of information technology, cemetery. Jennifer, you are, like most assistants, probably the most overworked person in the community, and just a lot of responsibilities. Jennifer holds a Bachelor's of Science degree in marketing from Oklahoma State and a Master's of Arts degree in administrative leadership from Oklahoma. I just really appreciate you taking some time out of that busy schedule and sharing some of your perspectives around engagement. Can you just share a little bit more about your background?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me this morning. Like you said, I'm currently in Oklahoma, born and raised in Northeast Oklahoma. I spent 10 years in North Carolina on the coast, like Shawn, and that's where I got started in local government in the tourism industry, which was not difficult, trying to convince people to come have conventions at a coastal meeting town. But that was a fun job and really enjoyed the local government experience as a career. So came back to Oklahoma in 2014 and spent about 7 years in Broken Arrow, like you mentioned, and really enjoyed the community relations role and meeting with residents and all the community partners. So I'm looking forward to the new challenges here in Muskogee and opportunities as well.
Great. And I think with your community relations background, it's really going to be helpful and nice to hear where you're finding success in engaging with your residents and your stakeholders, and some of the issues that you're confronting now as you're getting into this ARPA Act. So thanks for being here.
You bet.
I'm happy to introduce Al Rodr. Al and I have known each other for many, many years, mostly through our ICMA connections. Al is the city administrator in Independence, Iowa, and has nearly 30 years of experience in local government in communities from 6K to 25K, working in Kansas, Nebraska, Minnesota, a little time in North Dakota. But he also has some experience historically in the retail management world, which I actually, Al, I didn't know that. Al has been a great professional and working with ICMA in a whole variety of different capacities, which I think is just a really a great attribute to the commitment that he's got to the profession. Al, thank you for being part of this conversation today. And I would love it if you would add a little bit more to your background.
Well, I think, Grand Rapids is a nice town for being so far south. I grew up on the Canadian border in North Dakota, and the winters are long. I think the last winter I spent up there, we took our snowmobiles out in mid-October, and we didn't put them away until mid-May, to give you an idea of how long it can be. So Iowa is my sunny south. But I do have experience in a number of organizations, different size organizations, and really everything I've done my entire life is centered around service and my passion for serving the public, and public sector obviously gives me that opportunity. And with as much background as I have, I can use it to help train and really mentor the next generation of managers and public servants. And so that's been my passion since I was a retail manager, training staff, and I just moved that to the public sector, and here I am.
Yeah, that's great, Al. You have done, you've been a presence in the public sector arena, and your reputation is very strong in our profession. So thanks for taking some time here.
You're very kind.
Really looking forward to hearing your comments. Well, let's jump into the topic then. The topic of the panel conversation today is the value of community engagement under the American Rescue Plan Act. You know, just given all of the things that have happened in local government over the past almost 2 years now, from the pandemic to all the civil unrest and all kind of the political polarity that we're all in the midst of, we just kind of think these conversations around engagement and how do you help people to stay connected in those meaningful decisions and discussions that are going on at the community level that are going to have an impact on people's lives. How do you go about helping them to stay connected? You know, traditionally, engagement has always been difficult. And so now that we have all of these additional challenges, we really are interested in learning a little bit more about how you are being successful in keeping those connections going. We have this tool, it's called the National Community Survey, and it really is designed to help people understand the 10 facets of local quality of life. And so as you start to think about how you're going to be moving your communities out of the pandemic and through the recovery and benefit from the use of these federal dollars, it's just really worthwhile to kind of learn a little bit more about how you're gearing up to use those monies. How are you going about identifying your community needs and doing it in a way that you're actually getting input from your residents on pandemic recovery, as well as other things that are impacting your community. And that's the intent of the conversation today. We have 3 questions that we wanted to pose to each of you. The first one is, how are you going about identifying your community needs and priorities that are going to be addressed using the American Rescue Plan resources? How does resident input guide the delivery of public services? Not so much how you're doing it, because that's covered in the third question, but you know, how does your community look at resident input in terms of, is it an important resource? Is it a high priority for your councils to include resident input? Just getting a better understanding about how you do actually use resident input is what we're trying to drive for. And then finally, we get to what strategies and tools and techniques are you finding successful for engaging your residents and your stakeholders. And I would love it as well if you would share anything about how do you track your performance? I mean, how do you know you're doing a good job in the work that you're doing, particularly when you know that the priorities that were existing in 2018 may not be the priorities post-pandemic in 2020. How are you going to know whether or not you're successful in that overall effort? And so let's kick into the first question. And Shawn, it would be great to start with you, if you don't mind. Can you talk about how you are identifying your community needs and priorities as you start to move forward with the ARPA work?
Well, the main piece that we're dealing with is infrastructure needs on the island. So we had a community engagement piece that was done in 2016 called the Carrying Capacity Study that was, it was part of the master plan upgrade that we had done. And what we mean by carrying capacity is how many people on the island at one time can the city sustain? So just to give you some context, so Tybee Island, about 4 square miles. We have about 4 miles of beach facing the Atlantic, give or take. And we are Georgia's beach. This is where people come to go to the beach. You can drive here from Atlanta in 3.5, 4 hours and be at the beach. And the area around Savannah is growing dramatically. And then you've got South Carolina and Beaufort and Hilton Head. You can see Hilton Head from our beach, just to give some context of where we're at. So people discovered it's a quirky little beach town. No building is higher than 35 feet. That is, you know, so it's people like that atmosphere. So we get a ton of people. So 3,000 year-round residents, well, 3,100 in the last census. And on a Saturday in June, we'll have 50,000 people on the island. So when you get, you know, that isn't unusual for a June Saturday, but those high numbers are starting to stretch out longer into the year. So when you have more people and on the island, you get more resources, you use water, sewer resources, things like that. Something that the city council is going through right now is dealing with short-term rentals. I don't know if any of you guys had to deal with short-term rentals in your communities, but here it is a huge concentration, and it's above 40%. 45% of the housing units on Tybee Island are short-term rentals, exclusively short-term rentals for the most part. And that means the overnight capacity of the island is dramatically higher than it was back in the 1970s. When the internet allowed people to monetize that second home, investors got involved. A lot of people buy a second house here and rent it out all year long and stay at it a few weeks at a time. So more and more people could have a second home because they could afford it now. So that was part of the situation. But the pressure on the infrastructure is huge. The water issues, the sewer issues, and now with sea level rise, we've got issues with stormwater and how to deal with more frequent flooding. There's one road on and off the island. When the DOT raised that road about 8 inches in the low spots a couple of years ago, we would see flooding, a dozen or so times a year where that road was shut down because of water at a high tide, not because of a storm. And so now it's not as frequent, but we're one of the first cities, and we are the first city in Georgia, and one of the first cities to complete a sea level rise study to deal with how we're going to deal with it. So with that context, we're going to be focusing our dollars from this program on drainage and mostly on the drainage issue and dealing with these flood capacities. With this, a citywide drainage plan is being done right now. It's the first one they've ever had. It's always been a haphazard approach to stormwater. Now we're taking a more holistic approach, looking at what's the future hold, and defending the island against flooding, adapting the island against flooding, and then where can we retreat away from the more frequently flooded areas. And so the ARPA funds we're looking at we're recommending as staff that we need to focus those dollars on drainage and water and sewer capacity issues that can happen in the near future. So that engagement has been ongoing for some time, and the city council is on board with that approach, and so that's where we're at.
So the ARPA dollars in Tybee is going to be used to kind of implement plans that you've been developing for a long period of time. Is that fair?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And it's just basically, to be honest, it's a drop in the bucket from what the overall costs are.
Yeah.
Because we're looking at we're relatively flat here and just a few feet above sea level at some of the high points, and it's going to incorporate a pumping system. So our stormwater drainage system will look a lot like our sanitary sewer system. We got a dozen pump stations around the city to pump that. That's what our stormwater system is going to start to look like into the future. So
yep.
That's a big issue. And we have a FEMA grant to raise homes, lift them up, not tear them down.
Yeah.
So you see right now, new construction has to be a foot above the flood level at the lot, but we're going around and raising some of the more frequently flooded homes using grant dollars, and that's a partnership between the FEMA, the city, and the property owner. Yeah. And that's we're going to year 4 of the grant program, and we've got 6 houses up out of 60 that we've applied for. So FEMA doesn't usually move very fast, and they're not disappointing here. So
yeah. So in addition to the pandemic issues, you've got a whole variety of other just kind of transformational challenges that are impacting the community for sure.
Correct.
Yeah. Thanks. Jennifer, can you talk at all about how you are going about identifying community needs in Muskogee as it relates to the federal ARPA funds?
Sure. The approach here is pretty traditional, and it started right when I got here in Muskogee with our budget retreat for the current fiscal year, which typically happens in the spring. So during that full day session with our council, which is a 9-member council, including the mayor, and we discussed the possible eligible uses with the council and got a feel for their priorities, and how we could make that all work together, whether it was shifting some planned budget funding to other areas and using the ARPA for some of their top plans and ideas, or just directing that funding straight to those priorities. So we are also looking at infrastructure and things like that for our city. Even though we're a younger town, we do have some water and sewer projects to catch up on here. And so the council is really the driver for the community input, and they take input from their constituents directly. So we haven't done any dedicated community events to receive feedback. We haven't done any digital tools or surveys, but those are the kinds of things in my last community that we did often for these type of initiatives.
Do you have a lot of people that get involved in the budget process?
We don't. It's usually just a few members of the community that attend.
Yep.
It is a public hearing and public work session. It is typically staff and department heads in the council.
Yeah, and are those the infrastructure plans like with Shawn? Are those plans that have been kind of already in place, or are there new projects that are coming up and going to be funded using these funds, kind of based upon council prerogatives?
Some of both. We are hoping to do some of the larger pieces of some already designed sewer or water work at our plants. Both of our plants took a pretty big hit in a 2019 flood, which sounds strange for Oklahoma, but we had a very historic rain event in May of 2019 that damaged some property around town because we sit on 3 large rivers here in Muskogee. So FEMA is still involved with that recovery effort, but we do need to make some upgrades there. And then we'll also do some new projects that the council is interested in that will help with economic development efforts for new water lines, for example.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That's helpful. Yeah. Thank you.
Sure.
Al, can you talk about what you're doing in Independence to undertake your community needs assessment as you get ready to spend the funds?
Well, we've used a kind of a multi-prong approach. We did the National Citizen Survey a second time shortly before the pandemic really hit full swing. So we had an idea of where our community priorities were walking into it. When they came out with the ARPA funds, we had our street survey. We've been working on a stormwater master plan, looking at our worst areas of town for stormwater. And so I had a lot of foundation. When they came up with the public input concept, we started reaching out. We did the public hearing, public input through the council, pretty traditional, but then we did it differently. We actually, we're not a large community, about 6,000 people. We actually went out on the street, talked to our Chamber of Commerce, talked to our downtown business owners, reached out to our ministerial association, any of our nonprofits, and started talking and just had dialogue with them one-on-one, as well as encouraging traditional social media. Hey, tell us what you think. And it sounds very robust. I was blessed with a grand total of 4 comments out of all of that effort. So what we're doing is we're taking that to heart, but we're also going to use those comments, that input, in our strategic planning process, which will kick off here next month. We use our strategic planning to drive our priorities, similar to what Jennifer had talked about in the budget process. Those priorities from the council and strategic planning drive my budget, and then we use the budget process to implement our strategic plan. In this case, it'll be the ARPA funds that are included in that budget plan. What are we doing? We've identified as our primary, guess at where we're going with this is we have a water issue on one particular street, or a water main that needs pretty serious attention. And we have one segment of our town that has a very serious stormwater issue. I think that those two will be prioritized, just reading the tea leaves. But we're also going to move into trying to help some of our nonprofits through the pandemic. And ARPA was really looking at how can we stabilize and help take care of our community economics. And I think our nonprofits took some of the biggest hits. And so that's definitely on the table. But how do we get the input? We're just shaking every tree we can get. If you're not careful and you walk into a coffee shop here, you can find some grumpy old men that'll give you some ideas too.
Yeah, we all know those folks. Those corners of all of our communities. Yeah, well, that's interesting. And I'm glad that you'll bring up, and maybe you can talk a little bit more when we get later on in the conversation about ways that you're involving all your community partners, anything that you're kind of finding that works well with them. But it sounds like you've got a comprehensive idea and getting as much input as you can on the ARPA fund. So yeah, thanks for that. I appreciate that perspective. Jennifer, can I ask you, how does community input influence how decisions are made and how you're able to kind of help out your residents and business needs?
Well, I think as far as funding and the budget process, we all struggle with getting citizens involved unless their water line breaks or something stops working. So what I found the most successful, as Al mentioned, with Broken Arrow, my former town, did the citizen survey twice. And that was very helpful for new initiatives such as curbside recycling or, changing a major service or gathering input for a general obligation bond. So that becomes very important for a long-term change of service or funding project. The funds here in Muskogee are not as large as some communities for the ARPA, but something like a general obligation bond, for example, in Broken Arrow could be 200 or 300 million over 10 years. So it's definitely important taking that input and guiding the council discussions on which projects and proposals they will vote on.
During the course of your career, have you seen council priorities being placed on getting resident input, and any particular thing that you can point to that just kind of helps other leaders kind of understand how resident input is prioritized?
Yeah, it's like I said, on the larger initiatives, meeting with those stakeholder groups, meeting with your nonprofits, foundations, anybody that would be impacted by certain types of change or funding, whether it's a certain ward or a certain part of town, maybe it's your veterans, maybe it's the schools, business community. So whichever town you're in, you definitely want to reach out and have those discussions, have the meetings. As Al said, here in Muskogee, we are meeting with our foundation. Tribal relations are big here in Northeast Oklahoma, so we frequently meet with those tribal council members and see how we can partner together. The school districts, making sure we're not overlapping, but maybe we can join our funding together, such as the ARPA funds.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm glad you brought the school district because there's a lot of that coordinated effort on the same stakeholders, right? On building quality of life. Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you. Al, can you talk about how community input influences how decisions are made in independence?
Well, we do an awful lot of asking for input. I think where we miss the boat is, how do we take it to heart? You asked the question about where does that go in our budget setting process, for example. And I'd like to tell you, as robust as our efforts are to get people to talk to us, we take all of that seriously. And I think we need to do a better job of using some of those citizen inputs, going back to our citizen survey, for example, and letting that drive our priorities when it comes to budgeting. I think that that's an area, to be totally transparent, we fail on. It's a lot of our folks are elected to city councils with some type of a mandate for, and then fill in the blank. And how does that drive the budget? But that's more isolated. I have a water main break. My street is bad. I don't like what you're doing with garbage pickup, type of thing. So I think that's what drives us more than this global, what's the community look like. The one thing that's changed that for us on a positive note is our strategic planning. When we get serious about doing strategic planning, setting our strategic directions community-wide, that really starts to encompass what our individual council members hear, whether they're campaigning or sitting in a coffee shop, they bring their comments in. And we get out of some of that more isolated, I have this pet project. Really forces us to look more globally. So how do we use that citizen input? I would say it's through the strategic planning specifically. And if you do effective strategic planning, it really forces us to look much more globally at our community. I appreciate the comment on the school district. We do meet with our school district and our county officials annually to compare notes and try and make sure that we're not competing with each other on bond issues or on legislative issues. We want independence and our community to be unified in our messaging as much as possible. So we'll use that. But again, I think that really understanding how the resident input drives our budgeting, we get nobody to show up for a budget hearing. In my days in Minnesota, I could have 20 or 30 people. That was pretty exciting. Here in Iowa, I might have somebody show up, but not usually.
Yep, the challenge that communities are all confronting and trying to figure out. Would you think, Alan, do you think that that Independence is a data-driven community with your strategic plan?
We're trying to be a data-driven program. That's something that's newer. It's a newer concept. We're, in rural Iowa, that isn't something that would be the first thing that would jump out at you. But that's what we're trying to move ourselves into, because take a look at what's happening with this. The positive about ARPA and the requirement for those funds, it's taking us more into that realm just out of need and prioritization. There's more needs than we have money. Where are we going to spend that money and why? So it's helped us get to that point. We want to be better at that. And we sit back and are envious of larger communities that are truly data-driven in everything that they do. And it's a great concept, but I think people have to understand that it's baby steps. You got to start someplace. Use your data-driven concepts on small decisions to get people accustomed to it. That's where I'm at.
Yeah, totally appreciate that. And I think the fact that you have a strategic plan that is helping to guide decisions is a really meaningful tool for you to use. Yeah, that's great. I understand. I understand how that process works, and frustration sometimes about not having to get more people out to be involved in it. But certainly sounds like you're moving in the right direction. Thanks, Shawn. Can you talk about how how resident input provides opportunities to influence decisions that are being made in Tybee?
Sure, and it's going to sound a lot like my two colleagues here. The master plan process that was underway prior to my arrival resulted in a master plan implementation committee. They didn't want to see this plan just get shoved on a shelf. However, as Al will tell you, and Jennifer will tell you, that the city council will come in and do whatever the heck they want. They may not like the master plan. They may not, their pet project isn't on there, but by golly, we're going to do it. But what we tried to do, and we've got an online system that we're going to begin rolling out more publicly. It's more been an internal measurement device for us that takes the master plan focus areas, things we want to achieve in the community. It has a short-term work plan. So we took that short-term work plan, and then the city council had a strategic planning session prior to the pandemic. Pandemic kind of shut all planning down for us because it was a bit of a zoo here on Tybee. We had the busiest tourism year we ever had, the year of the pandemic. So it was one of those, it was like, we weren't ready. And because we thought everything was going to shut down, and everybody left New York City and came to Tybee, apparently. And Iowa. And, we had a lot of Iowa people here during the pandemic. But the strategic plan then says they came up with, here's the things we want to achieve. And we tried to set timelines, but I've been trying to tweak those timelines and make them realistic. But what I was trying to do is connect those back to the master plan. So here's the areas, all these things, although you're using different words, you're both trying to do the same thing. We want to deal with short-term rentals. Let's take that one, for example. Well, in the strategic plan got a little more into the weeds and said, here's some specific things we want to do. And now that is the biggest hot button issue. It's an election year for Tybee. In November is election, and we have three seats coming up, and that's half the city council. And short-term rentals is a big issue. So the community engagement is a big piece of that. But linking that, then here's all the things we want to accomplish. And there's probably a little overwhelming. It's like 100 and some different individual things they want to do. Some of them are like get a new landscaping at the police station, but some are like address the short-term rental issue. That's a little bit of a bigger, more universal issue. So it runs the gamut. So in our system that we're able to update online with the department heads, it connects that strategic plan item to the budget. So you can pull up the budget under that thing and say, okay, here's the section of the budget where the money is going to try to achieve that goal. Now, we don't have like an individual line item for the landscaping at the police station, but we've put more resources into landscape maintenance in our right of way and in our buildings. We put $500,000 into budget maintenance, into building maintenance, so we can take care of our stuff. We're really good at building new things, but we're terrible at taking care of the stuff we have. I don't know if anybody has the same problem or not. It's like, a 5-year-old with a new toy. As soon as it gets the next new one, the old one's thrown away and gets banged up a little more. But, you're looking at, just general resources like the pier behind us. That's not a city facility, it's a county facility. But the bathrooms, and there's a building back there behind that pier that's a city-owned building that we had our Marine Science Center, and they moved out. We wanted to move in and put our parking services in there. Parking's a big thing. It's our number one revenue source. So we wanted to get them a new facility and get code enforcement and police on the south end of town here. This is the busiest area. The place was like you had a bad renter, and you walk in and you're like, oh my God, what did they do to this place? And we had to basically just redo the whole wiring, all the plumbing, take all the flooring out. It was filthy, but it was it was an animal husbandry center, so it's understandable. But we on our end didn't put money into these facilities. So we wanted to be able to show, here's the goal, here's the master plan, here's the strategic plan, which is more of, so you got your 30,000 foot view, you come down about 5,000 feet. Now here's where the rubber hits the road right here in the budget and what we're trying to do. Now, will that message get carried over? We have to do a better job of reaching out. So in that budget, one of those goals was hire someone to do community outreach. She's probably overhearing me talk about her because her office is right next to mine. We just created the position. We just hired this fabulous individual into this job to be our community outreach director. We've never done that. Tybee's been a small town. The huge upsurge in tourism and home buying and home values is more of a last 2-decade phenomenon. Prior to that, it was a sleepy little beach town, which nobody really wanted to go live at. But the rich folks in Savannah had a second home out there, sort of, that sort of scenario. But now it is now it's changed over the last 20 years. So that's what our outreach is. We need to be reaching out to these folks. We have an extraordinarily engaged citizenry, although they don't come to the budget hearings. I'm with you on that one. We get, nobody. That's been a phenomenon in almost every town I've worked in. Even Minnesotans are very engaged people. They show up to vote, and if they're at a budget hearing, it's because it's 10 below outside and they just want to get out of the cold. It's something to do, right? But it's the same phenomenon. Grand Rapids did the same thing in Minnesota, where you get the same 5 or 6 people that show up to every hearing and say you're doing a horrible job, or hey, I want this project done or that project done. So Tybee is no different. But we're trying to make that connection from the strategic plan. And the new mayor has been more engaged in that sort of scenario. I think she's planning on, we get a new council in January, having a strategic planning session, redoing those goals and priorities. So then we go into the budget session, and our fiscal year ends June 30th. We put a budget together, we link it back to the strategic plan and the master plan. So
yeah, that's great to hear. Just how you integrate. I really appreciated how you went from your master plan to your strategic plan to your budget and aligning all of those things. I mean, Shawn, I've always known you to be a very data-oriented guy. Is Tybee a data-driven community?
We're trying to be right now. We would like. We are more than we were in the past. Let me give an example of short-term rentals. So when they started regulating short-term rentals prior to my arrival, right before I got here, it was the first year of this ordinance where you had to pay for a permit to rent your house on a short-term basis. Georgia law is a little vague on this stuff, and it is really a challenge between property rights and neighborhood rights. The neighborhoods are turning over to these. It was all done on paper. But when you got 1,500 short-term rentals, one person trying to file paperwork of 1,500 properties all in the month of March, because that's the deadline, so they're all coming in March. That's a challenge. So we've gone to an online system that forces them. We don't take paper applications anymore. You pay your taxes online. You pay for your fee for your permit. We can't call it a registration because that's not legal in Georgia. But it's a permit. And that system is called Host Compliance. They're one of the larger companies. They got bought by Granicus. You're probably familiar with the Granicus company. They do agenda building software and different government software. But Granicus purchased them. So you go on there and you can slice and dice the data in several ways. We're going through this our first year, making sure that what they have on the system matches up with what's on the ground here, and it's getting pretty close. But when you're dealing with properties and self-inputted data, there's always mistakes. But we can see how many what they're paying in taxes every year to us. Airbnb and VRBO complicate that because there's a new bill in Georgia that screwed up our data collection, understanding what they contribute, because the bill requires VRBO and Airbnb to, this was nationwide, House Bill 317. They have to collect the taxes from the renters because they weren't doing that. And so but they won't tell us what the individual tenants are paying. So we don't really know what individual areas of the community are paying more in hotel motel tax revenue, which is a big chunk of our annual revenue stream. You put parking, hotel motel tax, that's over 50% of our revenue per year. So we do tap into the tourism industry as a big chunk of our operating costs. But the data from that will be invaluable as long as we can get it validated. But it's such a hot button issue right now.
Right.
People are just doing open records requests, getting that data, doing their own data analysis, which is sometimes questionable because they're making legal and operational assumptions that just aren't correct. But that's up to them.
Yeah, we've been hearing a lot from just in the other work that I've been doing, a lot around that short-term rental. So this conversation will probably prompt some interest on folks wanting to get connected with you to learn what you're doing and for you to share or learn what they're doing. That might that collaboration really helped.
The density of the short-term rentals in Tybee is the issue, and it's massive.
Yeah.
And it is a big chunk of the local economy, but it also they can turn into party houses. So you're like trying to go to work the next day, and there's some jerk up there at 3 a.m. shouting, playing cornhole or something till 3 o'clock in the morning, and they're up next door, they're out in the pool, and it's little things like that keeps. And when you got 6 of them around you, it's a problem. So we have to, and neighborhoods are kind of falling apart, and they're not full-time residents. They're just, so half of the short-term rentals are in the residential zone. So that's where I think the council is going to go with their focus, is putting occupancy limits and limits on the number of them in the residential zone. So that seems to be where the conversation is going.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thanks, and best of luck with that challenge. That's because it's a huge impact on the quality of life in the community for sure. Thanks. Al, can I ask you? Can you share a little bit about the tools and approaches that you take in doing engagement, and how you use that at all for tracking your performance?
Well, this will sound a little bit like an ad, and I don't mean it to be, but we've used some of the survey tools through Polco that have been very successful for us. You always want more input when you put something out there. You're looking for all of the gosh, I'd like to have 6,000 responses with 6,000 residents, but we never get that much feedback. But we do use surveying to do a lot of our information collecting. Otherwise, as what tools to engage citizenry, it's being out there with them. We have to go out and ask them. The strategy of going where they're at, because the citizens are not coming to us. We can't open our doors and say we're going to have a public hearing. Nobody cares. So we have to go out to where they're at, and we'll do that through events at our service clubs, events through the chamber, talking to people where, again, literally where they're at, the coffee shop, the restaurant. The most effective mechanism that we've had for conveying our message over the last 5 years is very low tech. We put little one-page triangular postcards on the tables at restaurants. And before the pandemic, that was the #1 rated information mechanism that the city had. That beat out social media, that beat out newspaper. We don't have a radio or a TV. It was just putting something on, about every 6 weeks, we'd put a new flyer on the tables at the restaurant. The pandemic came, we did away with that because the restaurants closed for a while. So we're looking at doing that. But then it's communicating over and over again. This is where we're going. Shawn, I really appreciated what he suggested about that 30,000 foot level. When we do strategic planning, we ask our council to give us strategic directions. What are those hot button items? What are those big picture things that they want addressed? We take that back to our staff to create our action plan, our implementation plan. And then it's an accountability piece. It is, I go back to the council once a quarter. These are the things that we've done. In the meantime, my staff hold me accountable by bringing me the things that they've worked on a monthly basis. Each one has an area of interest that pertains to their department. What are they doing to drive those strategic directions monthly in their department? But all of this has to have budget dollars behind it. So that's where we use the budget to drive implementation once we set those strategic directions. I understand it makes me talk fast. I'm excited. This is what I'm passionate about, is how do we get that implementation piece done? How do we go back to the citizens and say, you said you wanted trails. Here you go. We added 4 trails in the last 18 months in Independence to help complete a trail connectivity strategic direction that was given to us. And how exciting is that when we can turn around and look at it and say, you want trails, here's connectivity, it makes sense, and this is why. And whether the citizens show up at a meeting or not, when you go talk to them in the community, they like it because that's all they talk about. And so we have to stop being shy about tooting our own horn and talking about our successes when we have them.
Yeah, thanks, Al. And I appreciate the plug for the NCS work that you guys are doing. I mean, on the one hand, you're able to, with your trail development, you're able to go out and share. We completed 4 trails. The value of the survey, and I'll spend 1 second on this, is just you now have an objective quality of life indicator that you can go back and say, this, we talked to the residents, you now have the data that shows what the residents feel. I'm kind of curious, though, if you, so many communities, I think, are doing the same thing or recognize the same value or same group of leaders in the community that are in the corner shops that have such a huge impact. Have you found any kind of formal way to engage with those kind of unique but really influential groups in the community?
No, I don't have anything that's, well, maybe it doesn't feel unique to me, but we just make it a point to go and talk to them. And it's not just in the corner shops. It's not just the banker in his office. We try and go talking to people when I say where they're at. I don't know if you have bus stops. Are you talking to people at the bus stop? Are you talking to people that are standing in line at the coffee shop waiting for their order? We're blessed with a couple of folks that are very outgoing, very extroverted, and so they don't mind starting up a conversation. If I go down to the football game, I can stand at the concession line at the football game and talk to people. I'll tell you what, we find it easy to steer the conversation to things that are going on in the community. People have an opinion, but you got to go find them. You have to knock on their door, if you will, versus waiting for them to walk into your door at City Hall. It's just a different attitude about who the customer is. We have to go to them.
I'm hearing what I'm hearing you say is intentionality. You just need to be intentional and make it a focused effort. Is that fair?
That is very fair. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's cool.
I do have to talk about the quality of life. You mentioned that with our trails. I did economic development in North Dakota, and trying to bring a business into your community from Phoenix, Arizona in January, talking about quality of life doesn't sell well.
Trails, I tell you what, trails, and Shawn can attest to this in his experience. Quality of life aspects have a huge impact on economic development and overall community vibrancy. So congratulations on getting some trails done. I think that's great.
You're right.
Shawn, can you talk about the strategies and tools that you're using in Tybee and successful for engaging residents? I mean, I think you're particularly in this unique spot where you've got your resident engagement population and then you have your tourist engagement population. And I'd be interested in kind of hearing what you have to say about kind of both of those groups and what you're finding successful.
What most recently we've done is I would hold community meetings just every quarter. They would just come on out, ask the city manager anything, but we had to kill that off during the pandemic. We tried Zoom during the budget process and no one would show up, or 1 or 2 people. Then we went and we've hired our community engagement officer is to come up with new and better ways. I do a thing, and I like the idea of going out and meeting people where they're at. I made a little note. I'm going to do more, but I do have coffee with the city manager every Friday morning at 9. We do a live and now Zoom. It's a mixture. We have a Zoom screen up for folks who aren't comfortable yet. But the challenge is the transient population that we have during this tourist season is massive. And how do you balance, trying to deliver service to 50,000 people, which is basically police and fire, and then also service the local community. And that's the challenge. There's a conflict there. You see it in town-gown relationships. You see it in tourist destinations. So it's an ongoing challenge. And see, why can't we educate these people more on what the rules are, that they're not supposed to drive down this street, or they're not supposed to bring their dog on the beach. Don't bring your dog on the beach on Tybee, please. It's a $300 fine. It's because it's 10, 20, 30,000 new people every week. And it's, overnight, it's 10, 20,000 people overnight every week. They come in, they stay for a week and they're gone. They come, next group is in. So that's a challenge. But it frustrates the locals because they see people out there breaking the rules. I get a lot of unhappy visitors who have to pay a $300 fine because they didn't see this giant sign that says no pets. But that's it.
Yeah. Do you have any mechanism to kind of separate out the resident input from your tourist income or your tourist population?
Nothing formalized. We know who's local and who's not. It's a small town. Social media doesn't help because you go on there, try to get a feel for what the community says. I've stopped doing that because it's the same 12 people. Most people on social media for the community are silent. They're just kind of watching the show happen on every issue that pops up. So we've been trying to engage more. So reaching out and doing more active engagement rather than passive and waiting and seeing. We need to be more active, getting out and asking what that is. And when tourism season hits, it's 100 miles an hour for 4 months, and if not 5 months. And,
I'm excited to see your experience or hear about your experience with your new hire, with your outreach person. I think congratulations. I think that's just a brilliant move. Yeah. Thanks so much. Jennifer, can you talk about the strategies and tools that you're using and finding successful for engaging residents and helping to move your community forward?
You bet. Some of these are current practices and some are from a past city, but I agree with Al and Shawn. It's much easier to be proactive and get your messaging out ahead of the calls from residents asking the progress on a certain initiative or project. So like a wise city manager once told me, if you're doing all these great things, but not telling your community about what you're doing, it's like one hand clapping. So whether you have one person or just your admin staff or a team of 5, it's really important to build that city newsroom, is what I call it. So here in Muskogee, it's one person, and we supplement that with contract PR firms as needed. But doing the short videos on project progress, talking about street work, I think Al or Shawn mentioned quadrants of the city, getting those updates done. Here in Muskogee, we put that front and center on our website, which we recently upgraded. So that's one of our number one complaints is fix the streets. So we are fixing the streets, and we are telling our residents where that status is in each quadrant. And we recently started email newsletter this month. We have a TV public access channel. So all the traditional and online ways. It doesn't take a lot of time making those posts on social media or your website news stories, but make sure you're doing those weekly and monthly updates on projects and funding, and even the signs out by the road when you're building a fire station. Remind the community where that funding came from, and get the messaging out. It's really helpful.
That is a great suggestion and idea. I really appreciate that. I love your one hand clapping analogy. I think that is so true. And the value of being proactive. Can you add a little bit more though? Because these broadcast sessions here are really designed to take advantage of the video aspect. And I would really love to just hear any advice that you would provide to other local government folks about the value of doing the short videos and anything you have found successful?
Sure. We did a couple of different series in Broken Arrow. One of them was City Council Highlights, and that's the bi-monthly. So every other week was council meeting, and we filmed a 5-minute briefing on what happened, kind of like the president or the governor might do. Here's what happened at last night's council meeting, because we all know that most of your town doesn't want to watch a 2 or 3 hour council meeting or come sit in the audience. So we hit the highlights, what happened, contracts, projects, any major decisions, and throw some pictures in there, some background video if you have access to video. And then we did a monthly project progress video series around town, getting that footage. Oklahoma's really spread out. So this town is around 40 square miles. Broken Arrow was over 60. And so that's a lot of town that most people probably aren't driving through to see all the road work and the progress. So having a 5 or 10 minute video, even if they only watch 30 seconds, and then you have it on file, right? It's on YouTube or on your website for later viewing.
I just think it's been very successful with these sessions, and I think the communities really benefit from hearing that, because I think there is real value on taking advantage of that medium. And so super. Thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
Sure.
Thanks. We're through all the questions. It's been great to hear your ideas and your perspectives. I would love to just kind of open it up for a couple of minutes to see if you have any additional comments any of you want to make, or if you have any questions for each other.
I have a question for Shawn. I was curious if the strategic planning tool you mentioned that links to your budget, is that on your public website where a citizen can go walk through it?
I have to go back and look at it. I think the link might be down. So what the intention was to have a dashboard that the citizens could go and look at. We've got it buried in there because it's kind of in our beta testing phase. I want to make sure it actually does what it's supposed to do. And then I got it, and then the pandemic hit. So it's kind of this, we didn't really get onto it as much as we want. So now it's called Cascade is the company that we work with. I challenged them in this public facing piece was not what they're really good at. And, but managing a strategic plan and linking it internally is what they're really focused on. But I've challenged them to create these dashboards so we can see the major projects, get the percentage of completion, and they where to go if they want to look at the budget, where that is in there, and it's up on the dashboard. So when a department head goes in and updates the project in the system, automatically updates the dashboard. Getting that link was a challenge. I'm never stopped being surprised by how many things pop up when you're dealing with technology, especially when you go into the magical ether of the internet and trying to push things out. The technical guys start talking to me and my head just starts to hurt. I'm not that old, but I'm old enough to go, oh my Lord, I don't want to know this stuff. But just make it go. But we've got it in the beta testing. And if you go to our website, there under government, you scan around all these. Our website needs an upgrade. That's one of the things every person's going to be working on. But there's a thing called dashboards. If you can find that word and under government tab, you can click on it, and I'm going to go and make sure that those dashboards are linked still. If not, I can get Cascade to work on it. So it's not inexpensive, but it's not terribly expensive, and they're usually pretty responsive to me. It's just something we've got to make a priority as a staff to get this thing updated and get it pushed out. And it's just, we got so much going on this tiny little island that it's just finding time to get that other hand involved in the clapping process. That's what I'm saying.
Good. Same question for Al. You mentioned strategic planning and initiatives. Is that a document that lives on your public site, or how do you share that with residents?
It is a document that lives on our website. We put it out there pretty front and center. Over time, it gets lost deeper into the archives as far as the official strategic planning. We did a very effective plan 4 years ago, and we've been living on that plan, partly because of the pandemic, but partly because we're using strategic directions, not goal setting. And if I use that broader strategic direction, we can create the goals from a staff level that will achieve those strategic directions. And even with the pandemic, as our paradigm changed, as the parameters of what we're doing changes, the strategic direction really didn't. So how we get there was tweaked over the last 2 years, but we're still working toward that larger strategic concept of where does the city want to go. I throw all that out there because I think, like Shawn, if I went out there today, it's probably buried a little deeper than I want it to be.
Right.
But we're just kicking off our new strategic planning effort here in the next month.
Okay.
And so we're excited to see where does that take us. And I think that's important. The one thing that Jennifer alluded to, and it didn't come out as clearly as I think it needs to for anybody that's listening, when you talk about your projects, your videos, and you're putting these things out there, you alluded to the fact that we need to be consistent. Whatever we do, big or small, start with staying consistent. You start the project, you start the videos, you start the messaging. Be consistent before we chase that next big item, because we need to train our citizenry in, or give them something they can rely on. They might not be there every week or every month, but they have to know it's going to be there when they need it. And I think that, Shawn, you talk about how busy and how distracted we get every day, and that's all of us. That consistency is a real challenge, but that's what I've challenged my staff and myself to be consistent with that, whatever we're doing, so they can count on us. And I appreciated that, Jennifer. I just wanted to throw that out.
Great point. I agree.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. We always talk about life cycle engagement, which is also a really important message, where you ask people what they want, then you start implementing it, and you then kind of engage them throughout the entire process, including here's the outcome, here's what we did with all of that input. It really becomes a helpful way of being consistent across projects and across policy discussions, and great insights. Well, let me do this. Let me just kind of wrap this panel discussion up. First of all, thank you so much for being part of it. Here's a couple of the words that I wrote down. You're all focused on kind of environmental or infrastructure related issues. What was really interesting with this conversation is your investment focus on environmental challenge, which is a much bigger kind of an issue that everyone's trying to struggle and get their arms around. So that was a really interesting perspective. You're all doing really great engagement works in various ways, but you also recognize that there's room for improvement, as every community says. You've all kind of emphasized the fact that those personal interactions are probably the best, but it's also nice to get the kind of more data-driven kind of information that you get from surveys and those kind of resources. On the tools and the strategies, I think that the fact that the technology is there that's available for you, but it doesn't take away from those day-to-day interactions that you have. And Al and Jennifer and Shawn, I'm glad you've kind of all focused in on the consistency aspect, because I think that is such an important part of keeping people intact and keeping people engaged on the things that are impacting. So this was a super conversation, and really appreciate all of your thoughts. So let's just kind of wrap it up here. I apologize for going over an hour, which I promised you I was going to stay within. But so thanks for hanging in there with me. I do these conversations every week. And so if you know of anybody that would be interested and would have a good perspective to share, I would welcome you to get them in connection with me. And we'll get them scheduled in as a future guest. We take these sessions and we'll break them into highlight segments that you'll start seeing on LinkedIn probably within another week or so. What we love it is when you share that highlight segment with your LinkedIn network, so that everybody can benefit from your insights. There's a lot of folks that actually trust your perspectives and your ideas, and it'd be really helpful for you to share your comments with them. I will get in connection or in contact with you probably within the next week or so, just to get feedback on this experience and any suggestions that you have for other topics, other ideas, ways that we can improve on communicating the message. I find it really worthwhile. It's fun for me to get reconnected with Shawn, you and Al, who I haven't seen and talked to for a while. So I really appreciate that. Jennifer, it's always great for me to meet new people, and really welcome and thank you for your contributions today. So with that, I will let you go, and we'll let you get on to the rest of your day. I just really appreciate sharing your ideas with us.